I feel like we've all experienced a time as a kid when our parents wouldn't let us engage with some form of entertainment, whether that be a movie, TV show, or video game, due to its inclusion of mature content. Or maybe it's just me who was sheltered, who knows. Regardless, I remember one day during freshman year of high school when I came upon a YouTube video of someone playing the new Doom. At the time, I was young and looking to play any new games that would grab my attention, so as soon as I saw the game's badass, gory gameplay, I was like, yep, I need that. Well, a few days later, I asked my mom if I could get the game for my birthday, but she instantly denied me, saying, Luke, there's no way I'm letting you play that demonic shit, or something along those lines. Well, sorry mother, I'm officially a grown-up now and can play whatever games I please, and there's nothing you can do about it. Jokes aside, I figured with Doom the Dark Ages coming out, what better time to officially burn my Doom V card, especially since the games are included on Game Pass. I didn't have time to play all the older original titles, but I did want to give both the 2016 reboot and Doom Eternal a fair shake before jumping into Dark Ages. After playing through all of them in such a short time span, naturally, comparisons started to arise in my brain to the point that I started to wonder which of these games is truly the best. Typically in video game series, each subsequent release will improve upon the prior one in both the complexity and quality of its gameplay systems, graphics, and storytelling, while keeping the overall vision and structure relatively the same. However, when playing through the modern Doom games, it almost felt like id Software was trying to reinvent the wheel with each release, giving each their own unique focus and style. What I mean by that is if you look at the 2016 reboot, it's a game that is very grounded and pretty simple in its vision and execution. It has its core systems that work really well, but the game doesn't stray too far from that. Doom Eternal takes some of those key pillars and evolves them drastically while also going in an entirely new direction in many aspects. Naturally, you'd expect Doom the Dark Ages to expand upon this direction even further, yet the game instead goes in a completely new, different direction out of nowhere, feeling almost like a spin-off of sorts. Many people may not like this, but I actually feel like it manages to give each game a unique identity and helps them feel refreshing and not overly reliant on the success of their predecessors. Each game is masterful and fun in its own way, and I appreciate each of them for different qualities, but ultimately, one can never just be content liking three things equally. So the question is, which one do I think is truly the best? As a disclaimer, I came in with little to no knowledge of what this series really was or how people viewed Doom 2016 or Doom Eternal, besides the fact that this series was very beloved. I also barely watched any of the Doom Dark Ages reviews until after finishing the games. The point is, my opinions are mine and mine alone. I have gone back to analyze the response to each of these games since then to see where my opinions fall amongst the community, but that has done little to sway my preference. I also want to note that I sat down before making this video to play through each of these three games in one sitting back to back to back, just to confirm my feelings weren't affected by any recency bias. Finally, and most importantly, I want to make it clear I really do enjoy all of these games, and just because I think one of them is not as enjoyable as the other, doesn't mean that they can't all be great. These are some of the best shooters I've played, and if you told me you liked any of them the most, I would completely understand. Main point, this is just my opinion. With that out of the way, here's my ranking of the modern Doom games, and sorry mom, you're not gonna like this montage. Unfortunately, we've got to start with the game I like the least, and I have a feeling this is going to upset some people. When looking through people's thoughts online, it was definitely divided regarding which game was the best, but I think the most common answer was Doom 2016, with many viewing it as a perfect reboot for the series. Sadly, this is the game I had the least amount of fun with, which is saying something as I still really enjoyed it, but I simply enjoyed the others just a little more. As my entrance into the series, Doom 2016 did not disappoint whatsoever. My initial thoughts about the game when first playing it can be described by two words: badass. Or maybe it's one word, who knows. Everything about this game is incredibly badass, and it is so damn fun to master its mechanics. Ripping through demons feels so fluid and impactful, and is just mindlessly entertaining in a way not many games can replicate. I think my favorite thing about 2016's combat is the weapons, specifically the BFG, whatever it's called, the super shotgun, and the plasma rifle. The game is constantly giving you more and more of these as you progress throughout the campaign to face the onslaught of demons it throws at you, which increase in both difficulty and variety as the game goes on. All of this gameplay is really good, don't get me wrong. I think the problem is, it's just basic compared to what the two later games have to offer. 2016's mechanics just aren't as fluid or intense as Eternal, and they aren't as impactful or diverse as Dark Ages. The formula established here is really well done. It just can't help but feel a bit repetitive at times, with encounters not doing enough to distinguish themselves compared to what you see in the later games. I also just prefer how the other games reward aggressive playstyles, as that's the way I like to play, and maybe if that's not your thing, you prefer 2016. Tearing through hordes on your last limb in a desperate attempt to get any health or ammo to continue a fight in Eternal or Dark Ages provides a sort of flow state I sadly think Doom 2016 fails to capture. Additionally, I mentioned the variety of weapons and enemies as a positive, which they are, but these are aspects that just get even better in Eternal and Dark Ages, which makes coming back to 2016 feel almost bland to an extent. The guns just don't feel quite as good to use as they do in later entries, and there's a surprising lack of memorable boss encounters here. Just to note, I played through 2016 on the Hurt Me Plenty difficulty as I was unsure of how I would fare, but I honestly think the game wasn't too challenging and probably would play on Ultra Violence if I had to go back and do it again. It was definitely the easiest of the three games to me, not sure if that's a common opinion, but that's what I think. Okay, so aside from the core combat, I quickly want to touch on my thoughts about some of the other aspects of Doom 2016. Firstly, the game actually holds up very well graphically, which I was impressed by, although I surprisingly experienced the most bugs and crashes out of any of the three games. The excellent visuals really help with the game's atmosphere, which is a very brutal, gory setting, almost giving me Dead Space vibes in some parts, aside from the fact that it's not remotely scary since you are basically a god. There's definitely a good mix of areas between the different facilities on Mars to Hell itself, although I don't think all of these levels are quite as distinct as I'd have liked, with them sort of blending together in my memory. The level design of Doom was also pretty well done, with various secrets and optional areas to find that I engage with to a certain extent. However, the different areas were difficult to navigate due to their interconnected nature, and I found myself getting lost more easily compared to Eternal and Dark Ages. Maybe I'm just a noob, I don't know. The last thing I'll touch on regarding Doom 2016 is its story. Obviously, I and many others aren't playing these games expecting some narrative marvel, but I still found it set up to be interesting and grounded enough for the most part. I especially liked how there are lots of little lore entries around the world which the player can choose to interact with to flesh out the universe. Obviously, the story isn't the focus, but for what is here, I found it satisfactory enough and enjoyed how you can interact with it to whatever degree your interest leads you to. So, those are my thoughts on Doom 2016. I want to emphasize the fact that I really enjoyed much of what this game has to offer. The star of the show here is certainly the gameplay, which is of very high quality and presents a lot of fun, with a diverse array of guns and enemies. Unfortunately, in retrospect, it felt to me like a somewhat bare-bones, repetitive offering compared to the more fast-paced nature of Eternal and the quality of Dark Ages. Doom 2016 is a great game as a whole, and if you prefer a more grounded, tight experience, I could see how it may be your favorite. I personally just found the other two games to be slightly more enjoyable, that's all. Okay, so now this is where things really became tough for me, as I heavily enjoyed both Doom Eternal and Doom the Dark Ages for differing reasons. Each of them evolves the formula laid down in the 2016 reboot in their own way, and both games are incredibly high quality experiences. While I wrestled back and forth with which one I preferred, I eventually came to the conclusion that I ever so slightly liked Doom Eternal a little less. It sucks because Eternal is a phenomenal game. Right off the bat, I could tell that the basics of combat were vastly improved over 2016. Most of the weapons return here, but all of them manage to feel better thanks to their revamped physical and audio designs. I think one of the main things that people didn't gel with in Doom Eternal was the fact that ammo management is a heavy part of the gameplay. In Doom 2016, you could practically use whatever weapons you desired, not really having to switch frequently due to the larger ammo capacities and lower amounts of enemies within each encounter. In Doom Eternal though, you burn through ammo at an incredibly quick rate, forcing you to make use of many of the guns in your arsenal in every fight. This also means you have to worry about replenishing your ammo during encounters, which can be done by using your chainsaw on enemies. The chainsaw is super badass, but I felt like I never was forced to use it in the original Doom 2016, whereas here, you're often forced to in an effort to replenish your ammo, adding another element to the combat loop. I also think movement is heavily improved as it is so much faster, giving a better flow to combat. This comes down to a few new mechanics, particularly a more effective double jump, the ability to dash through the air, and glory kills now providing a speed boost, all of which allow you to traverse the different arenas in a more engaging way than in 2016. Many people say that the Doom guy shouldn't be so agile, but I think the improved mobility makes combat feel incredibly fluid and it gives that more run and gun style that Doom 2016 was lacking for me. That mainly comes down to my preference, and if you feel differently, I completely understand that. Another thing I really liked in Doom Eternal is the improved enemy variety. Most of the demons from 2016 return, but many are revamped on top of all of the completely new ones. As a result, encounters manage to feel very diverse due to the many combinations of enemies, which is something I felt the previous game often lacked. I particularly like that these enemies are given specific weaknesses that you can take advantage of. However, I think my favorite thing about this combat system that really sets it apart from the previous game is how it rewards aggressiveness. If you are low on health and about to die, the game encourages you to tear through any lower tier enemies to gain health. If you are out of ammo, find an enemy to saw through. All of this leads to encounters constantly feeling intense as you often survive by the skin of your teeth and can't just sit back or run away when things get tight. When looking at the opinions online, it seems like a lot of people really like this approach to combat, with some calling Doom Eternal the best shooter ever made. High praise. Others seem to think it deviates too far from the slower, more simple style of classic Doom, which I understand. I fall into the camp that just loves how fast-paced and intense this game can feel at times, so much so that it's hard to even comprehend what's happening on screen. Combine that with the fantastic kick-ass soundtrack which I'd been waiting for since starting the series, and you can see why this game is just so damn awesome to play through. Again, it's my preference, but Doom Eternal manages to provide a combat loop that is just so much more addictive and fun than anything in 2016. While on the topic of gameplay, I do want to quickly address one of the other primary complaints about the game, that being the inclusion of traversal mechanics throughout the various levels. I once again was a really big fan of this edition, as it provides small challenges on your way between encounters, giving even more diversity in the gameplay instead of simply having levels that feel like a bunch of corridors connecting the next combat encounters. Again, it's my preference, but I really appreciated the interactive nature of these areas, which I thought Doom 2016 sometimes lacked. Finally, I'll gloss over some of Doom Eternal's other elements outside of the core gameplay loop. First, I think the story here is the weakest of the three games, at least for me. It's not bad at all, but just lacks the grounded tone and interesting lore of 2016, and the heavier focus that Dark Ages story has. That's not why I play these games though, so I'm not too upset. I also didn't know how to feel about the game's different levels and their atmosphere. Some of them take a pretty wild approach, with you sometimes being sent to Earth cities that have been completely overrun by the demonic presence, or even traversing through shattered planets in space or hell ships. These were cool and all, but I honestly preferred the more grounded atmosphere of Doom 2016 and its various settings. I also am sort of mixed on the addition of the Fortress of Doom, which is the home base of operations for the Doomslayer that you visit between levels. Maybe it's just me, but it doesn't seem that fitting to have some super sophisticated tech base for a guy that's almost a walking embodiment of destruction. I don't know, maybe I'm nitpicking at this point. There are some cool gameplay benefits to this base that can be utilized to upgrade the Doomslayer, and I think that most of these are improved over Doom 2016, particularly in the weapon mods and character skills. When I originally played 2016, I thought it was a very fluid, badass first-person shooter, which it is, but Doom Eternal just took all of that to the next level. Between the increased focus on aggressiveness, improved mobility and fluidity, greater enemy variety, more impactful weapons, new combat tools, and better soundtrack, it takes the elements I found best in the previous game and brings them in a completely new, awesome direction. It would probably have been my favorite first-person shooter ever made if not for this next game. That's right, Doom the Dark Ages is my favorite Doom game, but just hear me out before you get mad. I've seen some of the hate online, people calling this game a flop and a failure, and when I first went into the game, I sort of agreed. During its first few hours, its guns felt noticeably less impactful than Doom Eternal's, and the fast-paced movement I loved in that game was gone. Also, like, what? There's shields and flails now, like, this is a shooter, not a melee game. But as I played more and more, all of its elements started to gel, and it all made sense. I applaud id because they could have taken the easy route and just made a glorified DLC, basically reusing all the same weapons again and choosing to refine the mechanics laid down in Doom Eternal following its massive success. But they didn't. They went back to the drawing board and reinvented the wheel, making a game that feels more like a spin-off. And yet, it's a damn good one at that. The main thing about Doom the Dark Ages that I'm absolutely in love with is the combat loop. I mean, what else would it be? At first glance, it's not as fast-paced or fluid as Eternals, but the more you get into it, I think you'll find it actually flows insanely well. Where the previous two games are more based off of offensively tearing through groups of enemies, Doom the Dark Ages has a much more reactionary combat system. Let me explain. Dark Ages has a very good amount of enemy variety, so usually in any given encounter, you'll have dozens of low-level grunts, several mid-tier enemies, and then a few larger demons. As you tear through enemies with your weapons, these mid to higher tier enemies will be sending projectiles at you, some of which are green, indicating they must be quickly parried with your shield, which feels incredible to do. Eventually, after chipping away their health with both parries and normal attacks, these enemies will glow purple and can be obliterated with either a shield charge or melee blow. Additionally, if an enemy with shielding glows orange, a simple shield throw can completely annihilate its protective coating for big time damage. Just like in Eternal, aggressiveness is rewarded, so when your health and armor is dwindling, you quickly must zip across the battlefield with a shield charge to scavenge any health you can and stay alive, keeping things incredibly tense. All of these different elements become intuitive, providing a natural, fast-paced flow to battles where you steadily bulldoze through one threat after the other with your shield in a truly awesome, impactful manner. Gotta be a top 5 shield in gaming, it's really the MVP of why this game works so well. Aside from just the shield though, I really enjoy how useful Doom the Dark Ages makes its different weapons feel in certain scenarios. For example, the plasma weapons can be used to build up electric charge or deal heavy sustained damage. The pulverizer is great for large crowds of weak enemies. The grenade launcher and RPG are great for large areas of impact. The super shotgun is, well, the super shotgun. I could go into more of them, but the point is, there's real strategy here for when to use a specific weapon, rather than just spamming one because you like it, which is what I remember doing in the other two games. And yes, some of the weapons I never touch, like that chain shot thing, I don't even know what that is. But I think people who didn't like the ammo management of Doom Eternal will be fine with that, as you can really stick to a few weapons that suit your playstyle. Doom the Dark Ages is just a game with immense variety in its gameplay. Encounters feel so varied thanks to a heavier emphasis on larger boss like demons, but also, each different level of the campaign feels more distinct than ever before. Sometimes these levels are more linear, like the other two entries in the series. Other times, you will be placed in a more open area and be asked to clear a few objectives. Then there's the mech and dragon levels, which are absolutely awesome in their own right and have their own mechanics I could dive into. Not sure how people still manage to hate on stuff like this, but somehow they do. As a whole, this is just a badass video game that's just so cool in about every way. There's so much diversity in the different encounters and gameplay, and all of it feels so fun and satisfying to engage with. I know many classic Doom fans think that Dark Ages isn't good because it feels too mainstream and departs too heavily from the series' roots. I never played the originals, so I can't really say if that's the case or not, but I can see where they may be coming from and feel for them if that's really the case. I just never played the classics, and therefore I don't share that perspective. Maybe it does bring the mainstream elements into the series, but it's not like these components aren't well done. I love the visuals and atmosphere of Dark Ages and the departure from a more futuristic technical setting. Not that it was bad in 2016 or Eternal, I just enjoy the change to this more dark medieval vibe, that's all. The level design here also relies less on the traversal challenges that Doom Eternal had, and manages to feel a lot more open as a whole, which I was a fan of. The menus and progression systems are also more refined here, with upgrades to weapons in particular feeling a lot more meaningful. Not to say any of it was bad before, it's just a certain level of refinement I appreciate. You should see a theme. Additionally, I'll quickly touch on the story, which takes a much more prominent role than the previous two games with a lot of cutscenes. Some people didn't seem to be a fan of this, whereas I actually liked it quite a bit, as it is pretty easy to follow and takes an interesting direction compared to the other two games. I mainly just like how badass it makes Doomslayer. There, I said it, but again, narrative is not the reason why I'm playing these games, so. My only real gripe with Doom the Dark Ages is its soundtrack, which takes a noticeable step back compared to Eternal. Very minor nitpick, but it's lacking that badass marketed Doom music in my opinion, which does suck. So, that's really all I have to say regarding Doom the Dark Ages. It's an incredibly fun game with a combat system that manages to feel intense and fluid in ways completely different from Doom Eternal, and for that, I applaud it. It's overall just such a fun-ass video game with an endless amount of cool shit, while also being extremely high quality in its visuals, atmosphere, and mechanics. Even though I've never played the older games, I do get how people could view this as a watered-down version of the Doom formula due to its bigger focus on story, more open levels, and less memorable soundtrack. What I don't get is how you couldn't have a damn good time playing this, as it is just an incredibly high quality first person shooter with one of the most engaging gameplay loops I've ever experienced, and that's why I'm disappointed to hear people hate on the game or see that it's underperforming. As a whole, I think how you rank these three games will come down to your views on the Doom series. If you're like me, I think you will either prefer Doom Eternal for its fast paced, fluid combat, or Dark Ages for its incredibly weighty, unique gameplay. Again, I found Doom 2016 to be a very nice entry point into the series, and had a really fun time with it. I just think the other two games are better at achieving a consistently engaging gameplay loop. If you're a classic Doom fan, on the other hand, your opinions will likely be vastly different, as you may prefer the 2016 reboot for its more faithful rendition of the formula. I think no matter how you rank these games, it's undeniable that all three of them are incredibly high quality, kick-ass games that provide a sense of engaging fun many first-person shooters fail to capture. While just a few months ago, Doom was a series I had no real opinions on, I'm glad to say that now, it's perhaps one of my favorite shooters in gaming. This ranking was a lot of fun to put together, and I hope you enjoyed a differing opinion on the series, because that's all this is, an opinion. And it's an opinion that can't take away anything from these three titles, which are all amazing in their own right. Cue the Doom music.